Hi, I'm Donna Kallner, and this is part 2 of the final video in Lesson 3 of the New Age Looping Basics e-course. In part 1, you saw 2 projects made from an oval base, a shapely sheath made with cotton yarn, and a pouch made without a mold from strips of bias-cut cotton fabric. In this video, we'll take a closer look at a project that might be a little larger than is practical for sampling at this point in the class, but you could scale it down. You could use different materials. You can adapt ideas from this example and design something else, or maybe many something else's. So let's start by looking at the design process. First, function. I wanted to make a bag in wool that I dyed with willow I grow myself and walnuts I gathered at a friend's. I wanted it to go with what I wear most of the time, jeans, and I had some indigo dyed wool that would go with the brown. I wanted the bag just large enough for my wallet, cell, and shades. That's all I want to carry. I wanted to build the bag from an oval base so the rim would be elastic, and I wanted the bag deep enough that I could use a button closure. In this design, I wanted to focus on color and pattern, so I kept the shape very simple. I started with a needle chain the length of my wallet, so the oval base built from that chain would be large enough for the rest of the bag's intended contents. I worked an oval base, increasing at the ends, and checking the size of the base against the wallet that I planned to use with the bag. I used the spit splice method to add thread when I ran out. When the base was large enough, I started building the walls. As you make this transition from base to walls, you may find that you need to play around with different ways of holding the piece. Because of the elasticity in the looping structure and the inherent stretchiness of the wool yarn, I did not want to try to have a color break where the base meets the walls. So I brought the color up from the base into what is essentially a bottom stripe in the bag. Then the next time I added on thread, I simply changed from the brown yarn to the blue yarn with a spit splice. My base measured about 5 inches wide. I determined the width of my stripes and pattern area on an intended depth for the bag of about 7 inches, partly because that would be functional and partly because 5 by 7 is a pleasing proportion. My intention was to divide the proportion of colors roughly this way: about a ½ inch of brown, then an 1.5 inches of blue, then 3 inches of alternating brown and blue on every row, which we'll look at more closely in a moment, then another ½ inch of blue, and to end the rim with about 1.5 inches of brown. In that section where the colors alternate on each row, you don't have to break off and splice on a different color thread on every row. You can have 2 threads attached and temporarily drop one thread while you work with the other. One thread is active, the other is inactive. If there's enough contrast between the colors, 2 color trades can produce the look of vertical stripes. This effect is more prominent when worked with bulky yarns and the stitches are closely spaced. In this project, the effect is more of a houndstooth. Pick a spot to make your color trades at the side or back of a piece. Stitch the main color to that spot. Anchor the contrast thread with whatever method you prefer. In this project, I pierced a thread on the inside of the piece with the contrast yarn and felted the tail to the thread. To begin working with that new thread, pass it around the main thread and leave the main color yarn hanging or inactive while you stitch a contrast row. When you reach the inactive yarn, drop the contrast yarn, pass the main color strand under, then over the contrast yarn, take out any slack, and resume stitching with the main color. It's now the active thread and the contrast color is inactive. Trade threads at the end of each row. I suggest you sample color trades on a small piece before planning to use them in a larger project. Let me give you a closer look at the last stitch in a row before you trade colors. After about 3 inches of trading colors on every row, I'm done with that section, and I no longer need to have 2 separate active threads. So I need to anchor one of those and get rid of it. So I pierced one thread with the other, frayed out the tail, and felted the tail to the working thread. Right about now I'm realizing that I got rid of the wrong thread. I intended to continue stitching with the blue, but that's an easy fix when you can spit splice. In the next section, I worked a few decreases at the sides of the bag so that the mouth wouldn't be too open. I didn't want things to fall out. In the final brown stripe at the top, I stopped making decreases, and I stopped partway through that stripe to incorporate a couple of functional features. Since I wanted a button closure, I knew I would need a buttonhole. I decided to make the button first so I know exactly how large to make the hole. To make the button, I worked a round base from a slipknot start, just like you learned in Lesson 2. Once the base was the diameter I thought I wanted for my button, I stopped increasing to keep it flat and started decreasing instead. I stuffed the button with waste yarn and stitched it to the inside of the bag. That told me how big to make the buttonhole. The buttonhole is nothing more than a needle chain that comes off the rim the desired length of my buttonhole, just like the hanger in the project shown in part 1 of this unit that was stitched from fabric strips. On the far side of the buttonhole opening, I resumed stitching into the live edge of the rim and around the rim. When I came back to the needle chain, I used that as a live edge and just kept stitching. When the brown section was the depth I wanted, I ended at the side with a knot and buried the tail of the thread inside the bag. The strap for this bag is just a simple braid worked from the same yarn as the bag itself. But even though I don't plan to carry much weight in the bag, I didn't want to simply hang the strap from the rim. So I anchored the braid at the sides of the rim and covered the joins with 2 small ovals stitched from needle chains. So now this project transforms the round base into a button and the oval base into a patch. I think you can see that the rim has the elasticity that I wanted. What you can't see, unless I do it on the video here, is the inside of the bag. Isn't that what you were afraid an online class would never let you see the insides of things? So let me turn it inside out, and I want to point out to you what it looks like where I made the color trades. You can see a little line of thread where I carried the inactive thread from one row to the next. With all the new materials we've discussed in this lesson, and the different ways of adding thread, and the oval base, you have a lot to sample. But please, when you start your Lesson 3 project, remember to give some conscious thought to the design as well as the technique and your intended use for the piece. I'll be back in Lesson 4 with flip turns and more fun stuff. See you there!